Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into the book of Esther, specifically chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Now, on the surface, you might think this is just a simple, straightforward story about a guy who stubbornly refuses to bow down to a powerful politician. But as we unpack the source material today, we're going to see that this simple refusal, it actually masks a massive, ancient, and highly spiritual conflict.
Okay, let's dive into this. We really have to ask ourselves, why in the world would one man's refusal to kneel trigger a literal nationwide crisis? I mean, think about the sheer scale of this for a second. Haman, this high-ranking official, is so furious that Mordecai won't bow that he decides to plot an absolute genocide. Talk about an incredibly disproportionate reaction, right? To understand why things escalated so insanely fast, we need to look at how this crisis actually started. Section 1. The Emerging Crisis. So let's set the stage. The inciting incident kicks off when King Ahasuerus gives Haman a massive promotion. He elevates him above all his peers, essentially making him the most powerful official in the entire empire. And with this shiny new promotion comes a strict royal command. All officials absolutely must kneel and bow to Haman. But Mordecai, who is Jewish, point-blank refuses. And it's not a secret either. His colleagues notice, they badger him about it day after day, trying to get him to conform, and when he doesn't cave, they finally go and report him to Haman.
Well, when Haman finds out about this blatant disobedience, his reaction is honestly shocking. He feels it is entirely beneath him to lay hands on just this one man. Punishing a single individual, that wasn't nearly enough to satisfy his ego. Instead, the moment he learns that Mordecai is a Jew, Haman decides he's going to completely eradicate the entire Jewish population within the Persian Empire.
Section 2. The Ancient Ancestral Feud. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what's happening just beneath the surface of the text. You see, the author of Esther doesn't just casually toss out these characters' names to fill space. They deliberately expose an ancient war that's been brewing for generations. Just look at the stark contrast in their lineages here. Haman is specifically called an Agagite, which means he descends from Agag, the Amalekite king. On the flip side, Mordecai is identified as a descendant of Kish, a Benjamite from the royal line of King Saul. Suddenly it clicks. This isn't just a petty workplace dispute over office politics. No, this is a generational rematch. Watch how this incredible tension builds right across the biblical timeline. If we go all the way back to Exodus 17, the Amalekites were the very first nation to ruthlessly attack Israel after they left Egypt, which led God to declare perpetual war against them. Fast forward to 1 Samuel 15, and King Saul, who, remember, is Mordecai's ancestor, is commanded to destroy the Amalekites. But what does he do? He compromises. He spares their king, Agag. Now, centuries later, right here in Esther chapter 3, the descendants of these two men meet again. Mordecai is literally stepping up to finish the exact spiritual battle his ancestor failed to complete. Section 3. Why refuse to bow? This brings us to a highly practical dilemma, doesn't it? Why wouldn't Mordecai just take a step back, compromise for a second, and save his own life? Well, there are two primary reasons. First, in the ancient Near East, bowing to an official of Haman's incredibly elevated status wasn't just a polite greeting, it implied a form of religious worship. For a Jew, that is a direct violation of the first commandment. Second, it represents this timeless, ultimate challenge. When forced into a corner, Mordecai consciously chose total loyalty to God over the fierce demands of human authority. And his colleagues? They weren't just casually observing him. They were actively testing his faith. The source material notes that they reported him specifically because they wanted to see whether Mordecai's behavior would actually stand. He had told them he was a Jew, and they were watching closely from the shadows to see if his daily actions were really going to align with his declared identity when the pressure got cranked way up. Section 4. The Test of Standing Firm. So the crucial point is understanding the kind of spiritual resilience required when you are facing totally exhausting pressure. What does standing firm really mean here? In this context, it means remaining steadfast, unwavering, and completely uncompromised in the face of sustained attacks. Remember, Mordecai's colleagues question him day after day. This wasn't some quick one-time pop quiz. It was a daily, relentless grind designed to break his spirit. And we actually see this vital command to hold our ground pop up everywhere throughout the Bible. On the left, in the Old Testament, Exodus 14 tells the Israelites, who are standing right before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in, to stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring. Then, over on the right, in the New Testament, Ephesians 6 tells us to put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, we may be able to stand our ground.
The text is making it absolutely clear. Sometimes true spiritual victory simply requires us to hold our ground and absolutely not retreat when the trials hit. Section 5. The Trap of Pride. Let's pivot for a second and really analyze Haman's internal motivations. What exactly drove this horrific genocidal plot? I mean, why have such a dark, intensely disproportionate emotional reaction to just a single guy's defiance? The answer? Pride. Pure, deeply rooted, unchecked pride. Haman's fury wasn't just some fleeting anger management issue. It was the physical manifestation of his immense, blinding arrogance. Let's break this down a bit more, because it's fascinating. Haman's raging anger points directly to his deep-seated pride. Like we saw earlier, punishing just one man simply wasn't enough for his inflated ego. In his mind, his VIP status demanded a much grander display of absolute power. Ultimately, Haman represents human sin fiercely fighting against God and his people. His elevated political status literally just led to elevated arrogance. He is the ultimate embodiment of worldly pride trying to resist divine authority. Section 6. Victory already prepared. And this brilliantly illustrates a really beautiful truth. You see, the narrative here definitely doesn't leave us in despair because it highlights God's sovereign foresight. Sure, this massive, terrifying threat to the Jewish people just erupted here in chapter 3, but God knew the crisis before it ever even happened. Think back to chapters 1 and 2. God had already preemptively positioned Esther, a young Jewish orphan, right onto the highest throne of the empire. He already had the solutions sitting securely in place before the problem was even announced. As Proverbs 18:12 warns us, pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Right now, Haman is at the absolute peak of his pride and his earthly power, which ironically means he is perfectly positioned for his imminent downfall. God fiercely opposes the proud, and all the while, the ultimate victory has already been masterfully orchestrated by God, working quietly in the background. So this brings us to a critical reflection for our own lives today. We've seen Mordecai's incredible historical resilience, and we've seen God's preemptive sovereignty. So if God has already prepared the victory, and he already knows the end from the beginning, how will you stand firm in your daily trials? When the pressure is on, and the world is watching to see if your faith is actually real, will you compromise or will you stand your ground?